Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and we're going to start this video off with a little lesson. This is the model we're going to paint in this video, the Great Unclean we're going to see here, and there are a couple of gap lines and mould lines and things like that that we need to finish cleaning up before we undercoat it and start painting. But I'm just going to show you the other Great Unclean one that will come on the channel soon. Look at those gap lines, absolutely horrendous. Now that was because I built that model whilst talking for last week's video, talking about kind of my army and what the future plans were, and it just shows you when you're building your models, concentrate, or things like this will happen. So take it carefully, take it slow, but remember everything is fixable. Now obviously we're fixing the gaps on the model we're going to see today, but just showing you how I fix the bigger gaps here, which is what people call sprue goo, which is bits of sprue melted into a poly cement pot, and it goes into that kind of gooey grey liquid you've seen there. Put it into the gaps, use another bit of poly cement to brush it in. Now I've got a video on this technique which I'll try and remember to link down below, but just showing you that everything is fixable. So we fixed the gaps on both models, but we're going to focus on this one today when we're painting. I've undercoated it black and then undercoated it with a Wraithbone kind of colour spray, really because this scheme is going to be super quick and it's based mostly around contrast paints. Now onto the green of the skin. Now Plague Bearer Flesh is the bulk of the colour, but we're not just going to go straight into Plague Bearer Flesh. You can see there we've put that Mantis Warrior green and put it onto the raised areas of all the flesh, and then after that, before it is dried, we're dropping the Plague Bearer Flesh onto there. Now what that'll do is a real nice kind of weird little wet blend, and it gives multiple tones of green across the skin colour. So I'm working in small patches, as you can see here, working kind of across the body of the model. Now when I've come to these kind of rent apart stomach areas, I wanted to do the kind of inner flesh in that kind of matching colour in this build. If you've seen my Rotigus one that I've done, I did a very contrasting colour on the ripped apart flesh, but I'm very conscious that I want to do these Great Unclean ones different in each model. So you saw there I took that Bad Moon Yellow and put that onto the fatty areas where the skin's just been sliced into, and again doing it while it's wet so it'll merge together. That's why you're now seeing me moving away from that stomach area and going back onto the other areas of the flesh, so really working smaller areas so that the kind of different colours of contrast paints we're using are providing the wet blend. Now on the broken skin areas, where it looks a bit more like hard skin that's broken up going into the model, we're taking a Gulliman flesh there, again working it on those kind of rough areas, and then going straight back to that Plague Bearer flesh and putting it into the edges of where we put that Gulliman flesh. And we've used Gulliman flesh on all the kind of hard areas of skin. Now, the broken kind of entrails that are coming out, we're going to Volupus Pink, lovely vibrant colour. Now, we're not going to use this on anywhere else other than the main stomach area where the entrails are coming out. And we're moving on to Majos Purple into those other split areas, which is not quite as vibrant a colour, brings it down a little bit and just adds a few nice sort of tones and highlights across the model. Now what I am doing though with that Majos Purple is going a very, very small amount and putting it over the areas where we've put that Bad Moon Yellow. So it looks kind of, the flesh is a mix of green colours going into where the flesh has been split apart, and it's kind of like yellowy purpley, and then onto the entrails. A lot of tentacles on this model, keeping it real simple on this one here. I'm going for a not Volupus Pink, the Majos Purple, let's not get this wrong, Majos Purple onto all the tentacles and things that are coming out of the model. And really, because you're putting that over the greens you've already used, because again these tentacles are painted, it is making it a slightly different colour to where you're using the Majos Purple elsewhere, so it does look like you've used a few different colours. Now, obviously with the horns, Skeleton Horde, nice and easy, fairly obvious one to go on all the bone areas of the model. Now, this is a very, very quick colour scheme. I did this over the course of 2 evenings and then finished it off Sunday morning. Probably total paint time of around 4.5 hours, I would guess, which is fairly quick for a big model. It is contrast paints. It does speed the process up because it's going across the base layer that you've done. And see here we've now done onto the smoke with that purple, and now we're onto the leather. So all of these so far are contrast paints. It is faster going over these white areas. It puts some nice shades and tones and highlights, all those kind of things. But you have to be super, super careful when you're painting with contrast, I find, because you can't fix mistakes as readily. So if you were to drop some of this leather we're seeing here onto the skin as we're going around the back, you would have a hard time getting it right and fixing it. So it's a balance off between the two. Very, very fast to do big areas, but we've got to be really super careful. Now moving on to the first of the normal paints we're putting onto this build, and just taking a Vallejo Deep Yellow and putting this onto all the kind of pustules that are all across the model. And you see here with this deep yellow, part of it's the camera work, but it doesn't really look like there's a great deal of difference between the tones in this model. Now there is in the flesh, obviously cameras don't really necessarily show everything, but it is kind of all working off the similar tones and the similar sort of part of the colour wheel, if that's the thing you're looking at. Now basing, fairly simple. I haven't shown how I've done the base, but this was just a Vallejo paste with a lot of the skulls from the Games Workshop skull set in there. You can see them painted up. And this is just a beastie brown, watered down, getting into all the little gaps and cracks onto the base because you don't want any of that white showing through. Now in a lot of my normal builds, I will spray models at lead belcher because I don't really like painting metallics, and I find if you miss areas it's quite problematic. So, but obviously with this build, much quicker to do the contrast. So we're taking the metallic colour, going across all the chains and across the vast majority of the sword there, taking real care not to leave anything showing through because you don't want pieces of white coming through that metal area. So we've done the kind of outside of the sword, the inside with these skulls. I did consider doing them kind of bone colour, but I thought it'd be a nice contrast with the sort of two different metallics into the sword. So taking a Retributor armour, which is a brass colour, and again working that across all the skulls and things across all the sword. And that essentially is the base layers put down. So fairly quick. Again, I wanted to do this fairly fast. I wanted it to mix in a little bit with my plague bearers that I've done before, just adapting some of the techniques I'm doing. I also wanted it to be very different from Rottiger. So this is more your classic, Great Unclean One green scheme, really. Now when it comes to the wash layer, I'm putting the wash layer of the Games Workshop Seraphim CPU across the whole of this, which is a slightly dirty wash, but not to the level, if you've watched my channel a lot, of the kind of normal Death Guard that I do, that I use a really dirty Vallejo wash, because again, I want it to be speak paints, and if I put anything too dirty over the top, it would kind of take away the effect of the contrast. You can see here actually, it's dropped into all the cracks, it's dropped into all the lower layers, but it's left the kind of contrast paint at the top. So now it looks like there's 2, 3, 4, 5 different shades of green all across this model, and it looks like we've put a lot more work into it than we actually have. Now you could leave it there, obviously that little show pass I just did, but what I'm doing here is going around and touching basically the bone. I wasn't quite happy with the bone colour, although it would have been perfectly fine. Wanted to bring it up that little bit of a layer, so just taking Vallejo bone white and really just kind of, not quite edge highlighting, it's not that detailed, it's kind of halfway between a dry brush and an edge highlight, working along the direction of the bone to not cover up any of that shade that's gone into the gaps and cracks. So the bone across the whole area there. I'm not doing anything else with the skin, not doing anything else with the leather, because I really like how this final effect has worked for what is this demonic flesh. But I wanted to make the swords and things just a little bit rustier. So taking some Typhus Corrosion and dropping some patches onto just the silver metal areas. Then once that's not quite dried, but nearly, taking a Rise of Rust and a very, very gentle dry brush onto the sword areas. Now, when I'm looking at the face, it kind of looked a bit too perky, if that makes any sense. So taking some of that shyish purple we used earlier for the smoke and dropping it under his eyes to give him basically some little eye bags to make him look a bit tireder and iller, because he's looking a bit too vibrant and fresh, which, this is a Great Unclean One of Nurgle, so just trying to bring him down a little bit, make him look a bit mankier. Now, we don't age brass areas with the rust colour because brass doesn't rust. So taking Nylock Oxide, which is one of the really good paints to have for Nurgle if you're doing anything sort of brass onto your models. So really, really nice. Now, this is the last paint in the scheme, and a paint that every Nurgle player should be having, which is Nurgle's Rot. Just to point out that before I've used this, I have given this model a coat of Games Workshop Unitorm varnish to seal it in after everything had dried. Because if you varnish after you've put the Nurgle's Rot on, it takes away that kind of slimy, shiny effect of the Nurgle's Rot. So this is the only paint I will put on after the varnish layer, but I do varnish them because this will be a gaming model. I want to keep it safe, and obviously you can rub paint off with your fingers and stuff if you don't, so give it a good varnish, and then Nurgle's Rot on the model. And again, in this lighting or the camera or something, the Nurgle's Rot only is a slight tone away from the green, but it is more visible on the real model, if that makes sense. And that is the scheme. Total painting time of 4 to 4.5 hours. I think I didn't keep an exact count, but I think that's a very fast way of getting a model of this kind of size and stature done. I think it looks real kind of exciting and vibrant and really plays into the classic kind of green Great Unclean One scheme. So the Rottiger I've done before was a lot paler, and I'm going to think about what to do with the two other Great Unclean Ones that I've got. I've got the plastic one you saw at the start of the video. I've also got the Forge World discontinued one, and I do want to do each of them different because I think these are very special characters. I don't really want it to look exactly the same right across the army. So yeah, drop some suggestions if you've got any kind of weird and wacky colour schemes you could try. And if not, I will see you on another video. Hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube jazz yet, and I will see you on the channel again.